go horribly wrong. We had a few misadventures off track, unintended, but overall, we got through it great. We had
Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt had once shared the screen in a film that became a cult classic, then vanished from each other's lives. No collaborations, no interviews, no red carpets, just silence. Until one night in London, when Cruise made a move that no one saw coming. But what led to this sudden reunion? And why did it take more than 2 decades for them to finally stand in front of cameras together again? The answers lie in a rivalry that Hollywood never fully understood, until now. In the golden era of 90s cinema, few names carried as much heat as Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. Cruise was the embodiment of control. Every move calculated, every frame polished. Pitt was the wild card, effortlessly cool, unpredictable, and riding the explosive wave of breakout fame. When Interview with the Vampire announced both stars in the same cast, fans went into overdrive. 2 titans, 1 screen. It was supposed to be magic, and in some ways, it was. Their portrayal of the brooding Louis and the flamboyant Lestat became iconic. The visuals were stunning. The story, haunting. But what audiences didn't see, what the cameras didn't catch, was the invisible wall forming between the 2 leads. A wall that never came down. While the film climbed the box office and became a cult classic, reports started leaking from the set. Long hours, no small talk, no camaraderie, just 2 megastars keeping their distance. Whispers of friction began circulating. Disagreements about lighting, character interpretation, even posture. Cruise was immersed in his usual methodical approach, reportedly rehearsing every micro-expression. Pitt, meanwhile, admitted in later interviews that the shoot left him drained and disconnected. And then there were the rumors. Rumors that Pitt resented Cruise's level of control, that Cruise was frustrated by Pitt's detachment. One insider claimed they rarely spoke unless cameras were rolling. Another suggested they were 2 alphas in a cage. Polite, professional, but ultimately incompatible. Pitt would go on to call the experience the darkest period of his career. Not because of Cruise personally, but because of the emotional isolation he felt during filming. Still, that quote alone was enough for the tabloids to declare a silent feud. And Cruise? As always, he said nothing, neither confirming nor denying. Silence, in Hollywood, can be louder than words. After the film, they vanished from each other's orbits. No joint interviews, no public appearances, no sequels. Even as both men continued to dominate the industry, their names were never attached to the same project again. It was as if Interview with the Vampire had been a one-time experiment, and neither man wanted to repeat it. Fans speculated, was it ego, artistic differences, or something more personal that no one dared to mention? What became clear over the years was this. For 2 of the biggest stars in the world, a second collaboration never even came close. They weren't enemies, but they weren't allies either. They were ghosts in each other's careers. And then, decades later, those ghosts came face to face on a red carpet with cameras flashing, and suddenly, the silence was broken. It happened on June 23rd, 2025. London, a sea of flashing lights, celebrities, directors, producers. Everyone expected the usual spectacle at the premiere of Brad Pitt's much-hyped Formula One film. What they didn't expect was Tom Cruise. Without warning, Cruise stepped onto the red carpet. No announcement, no build-up. Just a sudden appearance that instantly shifted the mood. One moment, it was just another glamorous premiere. The next, it was history in the making. This wasn't just a handshake or a polite wave across the room. Cruise walked straight toward Pitt, locked eyes, and pulled him into a full-on embrace. A hug, a handshake, and a few words, caught only partially by nearby mics, but the energy said it all. It had been 24 years since the last time anyone saw them together. Now here they were, smiling, laughing, posing in front of a race car like old friends. But the internet didn't buy the old friends act. Comment sections exploded with questions. Why now? Why this movie? Why Brad Pitt? Some pointed out the film's director, Joseph Kosinski, had worked with Cruise on Top Gun: Maverick. Others mentioned producer Jerry Bruckheimer, another Cruise connection. But most fans believe something deeper had shifted. After 2 decades of silence, Cruise had chosen this moment, this event, to stand beside Pitt. It wasn't random, it was personal. Even Pitt seemed surprised. And when asked about the possibility of working with Cruise again, he gave a half-joking answer that raised even more eyebrows. "I'm not gonna hang my ass off airplanes like that." The crowd laughed, but the message was clear. Cruise's death-defying stunts were legendary. Pitt? He'd rather keep his feet on the ground. It was the perfect metaphor for how different they'd become. Still, their reunion wasn't stiff. It wasn't rehearsed. It felt real, like something unspoken had been put to rest. Was this a public reconciliation? A soft tease of future collaboration? Or just 2 legends briefly crossing paths for the cameras? Nobody could say for sure. But one thing was certain. For Cruise to show up at Pitt's premiere and to praise it publicly meant something had changed. Because Tom Cruise doesn't just drop in on red carpets, especially not for people he spent 24 years avoiding. But that wasn't the whole story. The deeper truth behind their long-distance silence and the years they spent apart was far more complex. And it started long before the cameras ever stopped rolling. Behind the scenes of Interview with the Vampire, a different kind of competition quietly unfolded. One that never made it into tabloids but left a lasting mark on both men. It wasn't about fame. They both had that. It wasn't about money. That wasn't new either. This was about dominance, in style, in intensity, in presence. Tom Cruise was a machine, obsessive, detailed, always on. He didn't just act. He attacked every scene like it was life or death. Every movement, every breath, timed and controlled. Brad Pitt, on the other hand, brought chaos to the screen. The kind of raw, almost accidental brilliance that couldn't be replicated. He didn't play by the rules. He made the audience feel like he didn't even care whether they were watching. And that's what made him impossible to ignore. It's no wonder their energies clashed. Sources close to the production recalled moments when their acting styles grated on each other. Cruise, the consummate planner, would rehearse until he had perfected every beat. Pitt? He preferred to find the scene in the moment, improvised, instinctive. The result? An underlying friction. They were like jazz and opera playing at the same time, individually brilliant, but in conflict when forced into harmony. But their rivalry wasn't just artistic, it spilled into downtime too. During the shoot, the two reportedly passed time-racing go-karts. It sounds harmless, 2 actors blowing off steam, but for Cruise, it was never just fun, it was competition, it was control. He wanted to win, always. Pitt would later reflect on those races, admitting that Cruise got me in the end. It wasn't just a comment, it was a metaphor. Even off camera, Cruise needed to be first. Yet something about that memory stuck with both of them. Years later, Cruise publicly praised Pitt's driving skills, calling him a very good driver, and admitting that he'd raced him head-to-head. That comment came out of nowhere at CinemaCon in 2025, just months before their public reunion. As if Cruise had been thinking about it all this time. It's a subtle thread that's easy to miss, but it reveals something deeper. Despite their distance, these men were still tracking each other. Even when they weren't speaking, they were watching. Even when the industry kept them apart, they were locked in silent parallel, each carving out his legacy in different ways, always aware of where the other stood. And that's why they never worked together again. Not because they couldn't, but because neither was willing to play second. Hollywood loves a good reunion, especially when it involves 2 stars with the kind of gravity Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt possess. Studios tried, more than once. Scripts were written, franchises pitched, directors dropped hints, but nothing ever materialized. Not once in over 20 years. Why? It wasn't a matter of talent. Both were at the top of their game. It wasn't timing. They were often working on projects in the same cycles. The truth, according to several insiders, is that neither one was willing to bend. Tom Cruise had evolved into a cinematic daredevil, literally risking his life in every mission. Impossible film, hanging from planes, cliffs, and skyscrapers. He wasn't just playing action heroes anymore. He was becoming one. Every movie was a high-stakes adrenaline test. Every role, a precision strike. Brad Pitt, by contrast, moved in the opposite direction. He pulled away from the blockbuster rat race and started chasing scripts that were slower, stranger, more personal. He dove into producing. He picked directors over franchises. And unlike Cruise, who controlled everything down to the frame, Pitt was fine letting chaos into the creative process. Their philosophies didn't just differ, they opposed each other. Directors who worked with both say it quietly: Cruise needs to control the film. Pitt prefers to surrender to it. Putting them in the same room wasn't collaboration. It was combustion. It was two entirely different operating systems trying to sync. And there was ego. Not the cartoon kind, the subtle kind. The kind that whispers, "I'm not going to share the frame unless I'm driving the story." Who would be the lead? Who would get final cut approval? Who would get top billing? Cruise didn't share control. Pitt didn't want to be directed by a co-star. So project after project slipped through the cracks. A rumored spy thriller, dead on arrival. A big-budget Western, never made it past the first draft. Even Tarantino reportedly floated the idea of reuniting them after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But it never left the brainstorming stage. And maybe that was for the best. Because at the height of their careers, neither man wanted to co-star. They wanted to command. Two kings, one crown. And in Hollywood, there's rarely room for both. For 24 years, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt shared no sets, no joint interviews, and most notably, no words. Not even a stray photo from backstage, no leaks of secret dinners or quiet reconciliations. Nothing, just silence. In an industry built on appearances, silence can speak volumes. And this wasn't the kind of silence that fades with time. This was intentional, controlled, maintained. The kind of silence that hinted at an understanding: you stay in your world, I'll stay in mine. What caused it? No blow-ups, no lawsuits, no viral scandals. That's what made it so compelling. The absence of drama was the drama. Back in the mid-90s, after Interview with the Vampire, something unspoken lingered. Brad Pitt didn't publicly attack Cruise, but he didn't hide his dissatisfaction with the experience either. He told press outlets the film was emotionally draining, the production isolating. He even implied he didn't particularly enjoy his co-star's approach, describing the set as dark and miserable. Cruise, as usual, said nothing. No response, no shade, no denial. But that silence created its own weight. A weight that followed both men for years. Industry insiders began to whisper about creative differences during production. Polite Hollywood code for something deeper. One crew member reportedly said, they weren't fighting, but they weren't speaking either. Another described the dynamic as two trains running on parallel tracks, always moving, never meeting. Pitt, known for his casual cool, seemed to have made peace with it early. He moved on, took new roles, rarely mentioned Cruise's name again. Cruise, on the other hand, simply acted like the movie never happened. Not out of bitterness, out of control, because control was always Cruise's currency. And the one thing he couldn't control on that set was Brad Pitt. Even as the years passed, they were rarely even near each other. Not at award shows, not at charity galas, not even at events for mutual friends. For two of the biggest stars on the planet, the physical distance was oddly precise. It wasn't hostility. It was strategy, a quiet, mutual decision to not orbit the same space. And yet, despite the silence, there was never a definitive break. No, they'll never work together again moment. Just an open-ended pause that stretched for decades, until June 2025. And in that single photo, Cruise and Pitt, side by side, laughing, everything changed. The silence was finally broken. But that only raised a new question. What finally thawed 24 years of cold distance? Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt started as heartthrobs, but they didn't stay there. Over the years, they transformed into something rarer, legends. Yet they took wildly different roads to get there. Cruise chose scale. He leaned into the spectacle. As other actors aged out of action roles, Cruise doubled down, pushing his body, his reputation, and the limits of what audiences expected from a 60-something movie star. While others slowed down, Cruise jumped out of planes. While others handed off their franchises, Cruise became the franchise. It wasn't just about thrills, it was about control. Every frame of Mission, Impossible, every scene of Top Gun, Maverick, painstakingly curated. Cruise wasn't just in the movie, he was the movie. He oversaw the scripts, he co-designed the stunts, he even trained the actors. Every project was a campaign for perfection. Brad Pitt? He went the other way. He gave up control. After the 2000s, Pitt began taking riskier roles. Quirkier, smaller, stranger. He embraced the flawed, the weathered, the human. In the curious case of Benjamin Button, Moneyball, Ad Astra, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Pitt wasn't trying to conquer the screen. He was trying to disappear into it. And off-screen, he shifted just as radically. He became a quiet force in the world of producing, backing dozens of daring, Oscar-winning films through his company, Plan B. While Cruise stayed front and center, Pitt often moved to the sidelines, content to elevate stories from behind the camera. One chased immortality through precision. The other chased truth through vulnerability. Cruise maintained the myth. Pitt dismantled his. And yet, both paths worked. Cruise owns the blockbuster. He's the last of the true action giants, dragging an entire genre behind him with sheer willpower. Pitt, meanwhile, became the poster child for artistic reinvention. Respected by critics, beloved by audiences, impossible to typecast. But even as they walked opposite roads, they were always measured against each other. Not publicly, not explicitly, but always present in the industry's collective imagination. Two stars, two empires, two philosophies of fame. And when Cruise showed up at Pitt's premiere, those worlds finally overlapped. Not in competition, in recognition. To most onlookers, it was just a hug, a handshake, a quick exchange between two aging stars at a movie premiere. But to anyone who's followed the decades-long freeze between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, it was something far more rare: closure. Cruise didn't just show up at the F1 premiere, he posted about it. He praised the film. He posed beside Pitt with a smile that for once didn't look manufactured. And in a caption as subtle as it was seismic, he wrote, "Great night at the movies with my friends. You guys crushed it." He didn't have to name Pitt. The message was clear. This wasn't promotion, it was personal. And Pitt? He didn't flinch. He welcomed Cruise on the red carpet like an old friend. He cracked jokes, smiled wide, even teased him to the press. But beneath the laughter was a line that said more than most headlines. "If he ever does something on the ground, maybe we'll work together." It was sarcastic, lighthearted, but layered. Because Pitt wasn't just talking about stunts. He was talking about approach, about philosophy, about the very core of why they hadn't reunited in 24 years. Cruise had spent years off the ground, literally and metaphorically, building a filmography based on gravity-defying spectacle. Pitt had stayed grounded, rooted in human fragility. In that moment, Pitt acknowledged the gap, but also left the door open. And for Cruise to meet him there, even for one night, meant something had shifted. Was it age? Wisdom? A softening of egos after decades of dominance? Or maybe it was recognition of what they'd both achieved separately and what they never managed to achieve together. Because for all the blockbuster hits, awards, and magazine covers, there was always a missing chapter in both their stories. The one where they came back together, not as rivals, not as symbols, but as equals. Their reunion didn't come with a film. It didn't come with a press tour. It came quietly, unexpectedly, and with just a few smiles. And somehow that made it louder. Because sometimes it's not what people say. It's what they finally stop avoiding. The moment Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt stood side by side again, the internet lit up with one burning question. Will they finally share the screen again? For years, fans had all but given up. There were whispers, lots of them. In 2015, rumors swirled about a Cold War thriller that was said to be written for two legends. Nothing happened. In 2019, a major studio quietly floated the idea of casting them in a high-concept sci-fi film. Scheduling conflicts, or maybe mutual hesitation, killed it. Even Tarantino was rumored to be circling them for a final film. But again, no deal. Until now, no one had even seen them in the same room. But everything changed with that red carpet moment. Suddenly, fantasy became speculation. Entertainment blogs churned out headlines. Reddit exploded with theories. Fan posters flooded social media. People weren't just hoping for a Cruise Pit reunion anymore. They were expecting it. Some said it would take the right director. Others said it would need to be something neither man could control alone. A film that forced both stars to stretch, to share, to let go of the decades-old rivalry. One industry source even hinted that producers have been quietly watching their every interaction since the premiere. If there's even a 1% chance, the money's there. The script's ready. All it takes is one nod. But that's the thing. Neither Cruise nor Pitt have ever made choices based on demand. They move on instinct, on strategy, on something internal. For Cruise, it has to challenge the limits of what's possible. For Pitt, it has to mean something beneath the surface. Still, there's a growing sense, quiet, unspoken, that both men know time is ticking. They're not young upstarts anymore. They've both conquered the industry. They've both outlasted entire generations of stars. And maybe, just maybe, they're beginning to see value in the one thing they've never done. Closure. Not in an Instagram post, not in a viral hug, but in one final shared story on the big screen. Project that doesn't crown one king, but shows the world what happens when two finally stop circling and collide. It hasn't happened yet. But after 24 years of silence, we've learned something important. Never say never. For decades, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt lived like parallel myths, shaping Hollywood from opposite ends of the spectrum. One chased the sky, the other dug into the dirt. One built legends through motion and spectacle, the other stripped characters down to their flaws and silences. They didn't fight, they didn't feud, they just never found their way back to each other. Until now. That single moment on the red carpet, so fast, so fleeting, was more than nostalgia. It was a glitch in the matrix, a ripple in the clean divide they'd maintained for nearly a quarter century. It was a reminder that sometimes the biggest stories in Hollywood aren't about roles or box office numbers. They're about timing. And timing changes everything. No one can say for sure whether Cruise and Pitt will ever work together again, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real story was never about what happened on screen. Maybe it was about two men who spent decades being measured against each other and finally stopped pretending it mattered. Because in the end, what the world saw on that night in London wasn't just a reunion. It was a reconciliation. Unscripted, unstaged, unmistakable. And maybe, just maybe, the story of Cruise and Pitt is no longer one of rivalry, but of two icons finally finding common ground. So, was it a one-time moment or the beginning of a new chapter? We'll let you decide.